Well, good afternoon, folks. Old Buster coming to you again with a new story. I guess y'all heard me say this 100 times, but this thing about these stories having all this information is kind of serious. I mean, it's something that the feller would like to see and read about, I think. Maybe not, but there's no way I can put all this on the video. All I can do is read it to you, and let's go from there. But I just wish you'd take a look at it, and if you would write me again at busterandtheboys@yahoo.com, then I'd have your email, and I'll send it to you, transfer big files, and you'll have all the pictures and all the reading and writing and arithmetic, whatever else is there. And you'll find out all this research we've done. And I think it'd kind of bring it into context of what we're saying on some of this stuff, and you'd like to see it. Well, if you do, just write me a little note and I'll get it to you. Well, the name of this old story is Dang It. But I don't know if you folks, we come from Walmart land and Sam's back in Arkansas, but up here in Yankee land they got the Costco. And I was there the other day, seen a feller named Dean Borman, met his wife Svetlana, and she came from Russia or Ukraine or something, I don't rightly know, but nice people. And they said just give them a shout out if I would, and I wanted to do that. Dean and Svetlana Borman. Nice folks. Anyway, on with the story. The boys is up in Montana for a hunting trip and some mining business, and just stopped by for a bite to eat a snort or two before turning in for the night in a little town of Pole Bridge. That's when they heard old Charlie a-bellerin' in the saloon. Well, the boys went on in and ordered a couple of pitchers of moose drool beer and went to snacking on the pickled eggs and pig's feet that was offered up on the bar. Now, the bartender said he'd fry up some buffalo burgers if they wanted them, and so the boys ordered them as well. Now, old Charlie Clark was a grizzled old feller, but a kindly sort. He was a right mite off of his and feed, so to speak, seeing as he ain't been to town in now over 3 years. He kind of stayed to his himself, but was a neighborly sort. Well, Charlie was a voicing his opinion on taxes and politics to the bartender, which he knowed going on about 40 years or so. Now, Hired and Walter asked old Charlie if there was any good hunting in these here parts, seeing how they was from down south and didn't know not near a soul in these here mountains. Well, Buster hollered over to Hired to invite old Charlie over to sit down and have a drink with him. And a palaver. Well, after the introductions was made, Charlie said he reckoned he'd appreciate the company and said he would have a double shot of bullet with a glass of moose drool for a chaser. Well, all of them hit it off right off, and the boys told Charlie if he ever took a notion to come on down south that they always had a sure enough bang-up time and down there yearly barbecue, and they'd put him up. Had plenty to eat and drink, place to stay. If he didn't mind the flying, they'd send their plane for him and he could stay as long as he wanted to. Now Charlie asked the boys what all they was a-hunting, and Buster said he wanted to try to get him a moose, and Hired wanted a elk, and Walter wanted to bag him an antelope, and Jesse wanted a bear. Well, boys, y'all come to the right place and the right feller, he said. I got a piece of ground out north of here beginning 5 miles from the edge of town. It ain't that late, and if you'd like, I'll take y'all out there and show you my place. Y'all be more than welcome to hunt there if you like, and I'll be glad to guide you too. Well, that stirred the boys up, I do tell. They wasn't expecting nothing like that offer. Well, after eating and one for the road, they all went on outside. Now, there was a horse tied up to the hitching post alongside of an old 49 Dodge pickup, and old Charlie hollered, "Dang it, Bob, get on up in the truck." Well, a sight you never did see, I'm here to tell you, before that horse pulled up his and reins off at the hitching post and went round back of that truck and jumped on up in the bed by his himself. Charlie said, "Boys, saddle on up and follow me." Now, the boys are fit to be tied, I tell you. Jesse declared if that didn't beat all, and all the boys busted out laughing too. Now, Buster allowed they just didn't know what they got themselves into. Now, Charlie's place started out about 5 miles from town, but went dang near all the way to the Canadian border. Well, when they got to Charlie's place, Charlie got out the truck and hollered, "Dang it, Bob, get out the truck." Well, that horse sure enough did. He turned around in the bed of that old 49 Dodge and jumped right on out. When he was a-riding out there, he had his head plumb over the cab. Charlie mounted Bob and they rode on back to the barn where Charlie turned Bob on out to pasture. Well, Charlie said they knowed the way now and to come on out in the morning around about 4:30 and he'd take 'em a-hunting. He said there was no need to go back to town after a-hunting, seeing as how he had plenty of room there at his place. He had hands and a woman to cook and clean, and they wasn't going to be no trouble at all. Be glad to have 'em. Charlie said he had the better part of a week and nothing to do, and he surely would enjoy their company and the hunt too. Now, whilst the boys were ready for bed, after they got back to town from Charlie's place, Jesse pulled out a picture of the old barn they painted at his and Grandpa Esker's farm. Now, I imagine y'all remember that story, but the boys went and painted that barn for Grandpa Esker. Well, Jesse, since he was watching Charlie ride up to his barn, it got him to thinking on when the boys painted it for his Grandpa Esker. The old barn was about done in now, but Jesse said he kept Old Glory painted up as bright as a new penny on the side of it. Them was some times worth remembering, he said. Well, that got the boys to talking about their kin and the memories they'd built over the years. Well, Buster brung out a bottle of Old McBrayer, and the boys toasted to past years and future ones to come, and kin and friends long past. That old barn sure enough meant a lot to the boys and was a symbol of their childhood friendship. Now, folks, I got a picture of Old Barn, Old Glory on it, and that's what I'm saying. If you write me, I can send you all that. They got to Stern before first light and met up with Charlie a bit before 4:30 a.m. Well, Charlie took Buster and set him up where he would get him a moose with one of his hands that lived thereabouts, and Jesse close by, hoping for a bear, with Hire down a piece of looking for his elk. Now, Pete had one of his boys with him to give him a hand if they killed the critter and skinned and pack him on out. Pete was Charlie's right-hand man on the ranch and been working for Charlie now on 25 years, and knowed these here parts real well, and so did his boys. Now, Walter was another dog in the hunt, and Charlie guided Walter his himself, but had some bad news for Walter. 'Tweren't going to be no antelope, but would a Rocky Mountain sheep suit his fancy. Well, Walter just about jumped for joy when he heard that, I tell you. Walter's been a-hunting one for years and never come close to bagging one, and was tickled plumb pink at the chance of getting him one of the rams. Well, Charlie knowed of a place betwixt Paradise and Thompson Falls in the high country on private land where he thought Walter could get a shot on towards evening. Well, it was a mite of a drive, but Charlie had fixed it up with his friend to meet up with them with horses and get on the hunt. Well, it was getting on nigh to dark 30 when Buster, Jesse, and Hire got back to the ranch with each of them getting their quarry. Buster plumb insisted on his and moose steak that night, and Hire said he'd have to have an elk one too. The boy of Pete's, Tom, took Jesse's grizzly to be stuffed and by the taxidermist and shipped back to the house. Now, everybody was wondering where in the heck Walter and Charlie was, but nobody had heard nor seed hiding a hair of them boys. It got to be going on to midnight when the call come in. Well, Charlie told the boys Walter would live, but was a mite bunged up. Well, what done happened to him? Asked Buster. And Charlie said he wouldn't even have believed it lest he seen it for himself with his very own eyes. Walter was sure enough after a ram, and he finally got in range to shoot the critter. About the time Walter pulled the trigger on that 300 of his'n, he slipped a mite on the dew on the moss on the rock and got scoped on his noggin. Walter fell down and was perched something precarious like when that darn ram come a-tumbling down the mountain. Well, the ram rode on to Walter and he grabbed a hold of the horns and both of them went over the cliff. Well, now it took me a bit to get to the ram and Walter, and tell you the truth, he was some kind of lucky feller, says Charlie. I reckon that old ram broke most of Walter's fall, seeing as how he landed on that there ram most of the way tumbling down, but did get busted up some. He ain't got no internal injuries except in a bruising, but he done broke his arm and leg and scun up his head. I was dang lucky I had that newfangled sat phone they got for me for Christmas with me. I had to call in a chopper to air flight Walter to the hospital in Missoula. Walter said he wasn't to go without his and Ram, but I finally promised him I'd get the Ram back to the ranch. That's all he worried about. Well, I got him in the back of the pickup. We'll leave him at the taxidermist on the way back to the ranch, and then we'll ship it on back to the house for him. It'll be about 3 hours before I get there. We can all go see Walter tomorrow afternoon when they call us at the ranch from the hospital. Well, now, don't that beat all, said Buster to the boys. He done got himself into a mess for sure. Reckon we'd better call Lou Ann, give her the news. Well, Jessie called her, and she said she'd be in sometime the next day in one of the planes, and figured the rest of the gals would want to come in too. Well, all the boys had a big breakfast the next morning with Charlie, and was just a-loafing around till the hospital called about Walter when he seed old Big Mike Young come in. Well, Walter hollered to him and said, "How in the world did you find us?" Well, Big Mike said he was there in town this morning and heard Peter talking about y'all in the general store, and told him I was a friend of y'all's and could I follow him on out to see y'all at the ranch. Of course, he said, he told him come on ahead. When Big Mike got to the ranch, Charlie spied old Big Mike and declared he was sure was with that hunting party several years back. That he seen him there when he met him, when they was hunting this way, and seen him with old Bob. Well, Big Mike said he was sure enough right, and asked if and Charlie had to help Bob get in the back of that truck, that old 49 Dodge. Yet he just bellered out 11. Well, old Bob is doing just fine, Charlie declared, and I reckon we'll do so for quite a spell yet. Well, Charlie asked Big Mike what he was doing up in these air parts. He told him he was doing a favor for a feller that had a rifle made for Fred Shaw. Well, Charlie said that old warhorse been dating on 40 years, did you know? Big Mike said he surely did, and he was about the only person that could get along with the crotch of the old goat. They both belly laughed so hard they was a-crying tears. Big Mike had to tell the story, then how he come to work and learn from one of the top 3 gunsmiths in the world when he was a young'un and a neighbor to Fred. Back then, you couldn't even get a rifle made by him for less than $5,000. That was a pretty penny, I tell you, and the waiting list was 3 to 5 years. Well, Buster butted in and told Charlie that Big Mike was one of the best gunsmiths in the country himself, but he just done it for the love of building a proper gun. Fact is, Big Mike and Hired has worked up some mighty fine weapons for the boys and their government military stuff and their airplanes. Well, Big Mike said he promised old Fred he would see after the guns he made for folks if and he wasn't around, and that was what he was a-doing, just passing through. Buster said Big Mike was a-fixing him a Savage Model 12 243 stainless for ground squirrels with a bull barrel and gophers and the like. Well, Charlie said to have it at any time. They wanted to, seeing how the critters they was pure devilment to his cows was them dadgum prairie dogs and ground squirrels. They carried the rabies and the black plague too, the bubonic plague and anything else you could think of. Even ate themselves. The things would eat anything, even their own. Well, the boys and Charlie let out to Missoula that afternoon, went to the hospital. When they called, and Lou Ann and the gals had already huddled up, pardon me, in Walter's room. He was awake but a mite groggy. Said he was doing his in Chinese Qigong or something or another, or the other there for the pain, and the painkillers were doing their job too. He wanted to know about his and Ram, and Charlie told him it was all took care of. Well, Big Mike said hello to everybody and Walter and just grinned and said, "What you doing here now?" "All passing through is all," Big Mike said. "I looked at that 300 of yourn when I got to the ranch. Seems like them loads was a mite hot, don't you think?" Walter said he figured he needed to spank 'em some. "Well, you got a mite of that yourself, Walter. That's how come you got scoped. Better call me next time you get to experimenting with them loads." All of them laughed and said he sure enough better. Now, Lou Ann said they was taking Walter on back home in a day or two, and they'd figure out their plans tomorrow. Well, they all ate good that night, and Big Mike said he had something for Buster that he found up in the mountains off the trail whilst hunting near about a waterfall by a cave there in Idaho. He knowed Buster liked pictures and such and did a mite of writing, but that was not knowed to be knowed by just a few folks. There was a clay jar that was stoppered up with some drawings inside, and they was sure enough strange. Well, Buster said to let him have a look-see, and he'd dearly like to have 'em. Enough said, they're yours, said Big Mike. Sure was a strange mess of 'em, and Buster said he had a friend that would give him the lowdown on 'em. The next morning, Big Mike left on out and told Charlie he'd stop by the next time he was through, and Charlie said he was always welcome. Well, Bob come a-loping up to the fence, and Big Mike give him an apple and a pat on the hay. "Ever want to part to that horse? I'll take him off of your hands," Charlie said. Big Mike. "No, he's part of the family," said Charlie, and Big Mike just grinned and said the offer would always stand. Well, the boys packed up and went on back to the hospital and told the gals and Walter they'd meet up with them in a few days back at the house. Well, when the boys got back to the house, Walter was on the mend and ornery as ever. Well, the fall went to winter and time passed with life a-trailing along. Well, after a spell, Buster called his and friend at the art museum, and he called his and buddy from the university. And they all met up to have a look-see at the drawings. Them two fellers got all goggle-eyed and whopper-jawed and was a-busting at the seams about them drawings. They declared they was from a period that dated back to the prehistoric times. Well, after all the info Buster heard from his and friend James Q. Hartz at the Art Center, he had a question for him and his and colleague from the University of Arkansas. Buster said he reckoned it just didn't add up to him. Being as Big Mike done found this jar of drawings in the mountains of Idaho, and they just didn't look like the evidence they had showed him. Something sure seemed fishy to him. Well, James Q. said he wouldn't go for that, or go that far. It could be a discovery that turned history upside down on its ear. Well, what you mean, said Buster. Well, said the university feller, all that data showed that the drawings was for real and genuine. No mistake about it. The drawings was not forgeries, and explaining how they got there was a whole new dog in the hunt. Now, James Q. allowed that the only way to get to the bottom of this here mystery was to go to Paris, France, to the Louvre Museum and see the director there for some answers, and it was a feller, James Q. and the university feller, Professor Lincoln Note. His name was Jean-Luc Picard, and both Townsend and Professor Lincoln would write a letter of introduction for Buster explaining it all. Well, Buster figured he'd do a little reading up on the Louvre before he let out to Paris, France. Now, Lulu done informed him she was a-going to go too with him and have a little fun, do some shopping. Well, she also said she'd ask the gals if they wanted to go too. Well, might as well get Jessie and Monique for sure, and she can sure rattle off at their lingo of theirs. Well, Buster showed Lulu some information he done got off the internet, and it was quite interesting. He showed him what all he dug up on the Louvre and a bunch of other sites and things. Well, whilst Buster was cleaning some jumbo bobwhite quail and frog legs for supper, Jessie and Monique hired an Alma May come up to the house. They all said they was a-going with Buster and Lulu to Paris, France. Walter still stove up, so he's going to have to stay behind, but sure wanted to go too. Since they was all there at the house and there was plenty to eat, all of them stayed for supper. A little nip of old McBrayer set the tone for the story of the drawings, and it sure took a spell to tell it. Well, the gals reckoned they had to take some fancy duds to do some sporting there in Paris, France, and told the boys they was going to go, like it or not. Lord have mercy. Now, ain't no need in a monkey suit, caterwaul Buster. Lulu told him to hush up or she'd gun his and hay, and ain't no need in complaining, 'cause it's just like it is. He's going to work. Well, Jessie Plum got the gut busted laughing and said he'd love to see Lulu get on him for a change. The big galoot just sat on down and blubbered, and his old McBrayer and moaned okay to her. He learned that a long time ago. Monique said she was looking farmers to go into France and couldn't wait. Well, now Howard piped up and said he had a surprise for everybody and that he was doing the flying. They'd make it to Paris, France in about 4 hours and 25 minutes. No way, said Buster. Well, now, old son, let me show you something I got here. And then Howard proceeded to show them all a picture of a new airplane he got a hold of. It's called the Gulfstream 4+4+2. Then he get to showing all the pictures and whatnot. Right well appointed, you know, luxury style. And he said, this here's a picture of the plane he showed him, but not the new modifications. you know that I've been fooling around with the military and our friends in R&D with the Presidential Corps. I got us something ain't nobody else got but us. She has a triple layer of Kevlar with titanium with complete EMP shielding, and an entrance can only be gained by fingerprints, retinal scan, and voice recognition by us boys and gals. The only other people that can get into her is Dalton and Devane with the special Presidential Corps password plus the other stuff. Here's a few facts y'all need to know, because we're going to fly this thing sooner or later. All of you. Well, for some punch, Big Mike and me and the special effects and weaponry has done installed laser cannons on this fine airship, as well as supersonic sound beams. Ain't no weight to the laser neither, but it packs a mighty big punch. On this thing is we got to land at a protected air base so she can be guarded. I'll have that all arranged, plus our ground transportation, said I heard. She's all decked out inside too, for all our comfort. It'll be fun. We'll be there real fast. When we get home, we'll hang her where prying eyes won't see her till we're told it's safe to do so. Pretty, ain't she, after he got through showing all the pictures and all the specifications. The boys and the gals all loaded up after breakfast the next morning, took off for Paris, France. Everybody was high spirits and looking forward to a good time in France. Well, Jesse allowed this here new plane would make a huge difference in their business dealings, and already had his in mind where he wanted to go. Well, Buster allowed they needed to stop over at the mansion there in Kentucky, and sooner than later, and to visit Charlie, Caroline, and the triplets over in Australia. Well, Jesse and Buster also agreed they needed to go to Exuma and check on their bamboo houses after the storms had passed. Well, first things first, I reckon, exclaimed Buster. Let's get this here mystery solved and get on back after we have a little shopping spree for the gals and putting on a monkey suit for an evening out on the town. Well, Jesse said he just couldn't wait to see Buster and in one again, and bet he would be a busting at the seams. It was just about dinner time for Buster when they landed, and he said he wanted some of them grillards he ate whilst they was in New Orleans visiting Monique's people a while back. Sounds good to me, said Hire, so let's get a move on, skedaddle. Now, there was a limo at the air base and would be available for them the whole time they was in France. It was armored too, the driver said, just in case. Now, the driver was Bobby Joe Lyons from Waycross, Georgia, and Dalton fixed that up for him. Devane was someplace in the area too, and just might see him when they was there, depending on everybody's schedule. Now, Bobby Joe got them all over to a place called Relais d'Entrecôte or something, whatever that means, for some of the best steak and frites, whatever that is, and fries they ever put a lip lock on. Now, I don't talk his French now. A big plus was they filled Buster up to his and gills. Now, after eating, they headed over to the Louvre to meet up with Jean-Luc Picard. He met them all after they was announced and took them to his office where some of his staff was waiting for him. They was offered refreshments but declined. First off, Buster took out the clay jar with the drawings and all, and the fellers, and this one woman was there with Jean-Luc, and they went to jabbering and inspecting the jar and the drawings. Well, they had all manner of doodads and tools and microscopes, and all of them wore them little white cotton gloves. Well, after a bit, and with them finally quitting oohing and ahhing, Jean-Luc asked Buster if he could keep the jar and drawings a day or two for some specialized tests. Buster told him of course he could, and Jean-Luc said he'd call him with the results. With free time, the gals got the boys all gussied up for a night on the town with the late supper and VIP tickets to the Moulin Rouge show, whatever that was, they said. Well, they all enjoyed the show and then went to sightseeing Paris at night. Now, it was getting late after a moonlit cruise on the Seine, so everybody turned in as soon as they got to the hotel. Now, the Mandarin Oriental Hotel was a treat for the gals with every kind of beauty treatment available for them to get pampered. The gals found a fashion show to go see and got a guide for a shopping trip that was sure enough going to cost the boys a pretty penny, I tell you. Well, but them gals deserved it. They deserved the best, seeing as they had helped make the money they had and endured enough worry and hardship through the years. The boys figured they'd stick around the hotel for a spell, but had some unexpected visitor drop in on them. The Dalton, Devane, and Horace showed up and asked them if they'd had some time for a powwow. Sure enough we do, said Buster. Come on in, boys. Well, now, Dalton laid it right out there, and he thought something was afoot with this here jar and drawing, but he didn't have a handle on it quite yet. He wanted to go with the boys when they met up with his Jean-Luc and get the skinny before he got in the middle of it all. There's word on the street that some of our past enemies are out to get that there jar and the drawings. "Do tell," exclaimed Hired as he looked over to Jesse and Buster. "What you reckon this is all about?" asked Hired. "Boy," said Dalton, "I think this is gonna get hairy. Just wait till I tell you this." Well, Devane and Horace was on different continents and different missions when both of them called me in Washington at the Presidential Corps within 10 minutes of each other. The Admiral got a message to Devane telling him the fight was about to get in the fire. Then, that's Admiral Hannibal Coulter. Then Horace calls and says Julian found him and told him the same thing. Well, now, the boys perked up when they heard all that, I tell you. Dalton said after he got to hear what all the Louvre experts had to say, he hoped to get some sense of what all was going on, but his feeling was the Illuminati. Jesse said, "You mean to tell me they is raising their ugly hate again?" "Might be the case," said Devane. "Well, we had a message that Jean-Luc would like to have us be at the museum tomorrow around about 2 o'clock. Reckon we'll all go there then, but I want y'all to stay close till after the meeting." "How about us all meeting for supper here at the Mandarin tonight?" asked Dalton. "Sure be a delight for the gal," said Buster. "What you want us to do till then?" "Just relax and do what is normal for all y'all," said Dalton. "I got extra men about for security if and it's needed, but tomorrow after the meeting we may want you to come to Washington with us to headquarters. We'd like to hitch a ride with y'all, seeing as how y'all can get us there faster than we could." "No problem," said Hired. "We'll just see how all this plays out," remarked Jesse. Well, the next day they all met with Jean-Luc at the Louvre for the news. The old Jean-Luc said that this here jar and drawings are definitely genuine. As you know, the problem here is where the artifacts was found and that they are significantly advanced for that time period. It appears from our tests that a code is embedded in the drawings. A civilization far superior had to have made these drawings. They rewrite history to say the least. May I ask what y'all are going to do with them?" Well, Buster told Jean-Luc he didn't rightly know just now, but we're talking over with the group. "The Louvre will certainly compensate you if you so choose to divest yourself of the drawings and the jar. We're open to any figure." Well, Dalton asked Buster to hold on for a minute and talk to him. Well, Dalton told Buster and the boys that there is more here than meets the eye, and he'd like to take the jar and the drawings back to the Presidential Corps when they left out for Washington. Well, Buster and the boys all agreed that'd be a wise thing to do. Well, Buster told Jean-Luc he'd get back to him, but right now he wanted to hang on to the drawings and the jar. Jean-Luc asked Buster if there was any way he could convince him to leave them with him. Buster said, "No, there wasn't." Well, old Jean-Luc excused himself after saying goodbye. End the conversation, I reckon. As all of them was leaving the museum, Horace noticed some feller slipping off to the side and meeting up with a gorilla of a feller waiting in the wings. Just as the boys got in the limo with the rest of the group, Bobby Joe hit the gas. Half a dozen fellers started in a shooting at him like it was the 4th of July. Well, Bobby Joe had been on the lookout for trouble and spied one of the goons trying to set up a bazooka-like gun from the top of a Sprinter van. Bullets was a-bouncing off the car like hail on a tin roof. Well, Devane hollered not to stop, and that they would pick their own place for a fight. Well, Bobby Joe made it to the air base on 4 run-flat tires that had been shot. The guards at the base was alerted they was coming and to be ready for trouble. Well, Hired hit the tarmac running to fire up the Gulfstream 442 so they could hightail it out of there. The Dalton kept the gals inside and had Bobby Joe get as close as he could to the plane where had shields brung up to cover everybody. Well, Jesse run in to help Hired fly whilst Buster and Devane waited to be the last to board. Well, Hired gave her the gas and let her rip when everybody got aboard. They was up and away, but a helicopter gunship was flying in to intercept them. Well, Howard fired up the laser and blasted them fellers to kingdom come before they knowed what hit 'em. Well, old Dalton and told Howard not to worry none about Clarence and Washington, but to use the airport for the president. Well, Howard skindered back and told Jesse to hang on because he was going to see what this old gal would do in a horse race. Well, Dalton told Howard they was at least 4 hours and 25 minutes out, but he got there in 3.5 hours. What kind of gas you got in this thing? Dalton asked. Howard just grinned, told him made a few tinkers himself and give her a little something extra. We'll have a talk about that later on, he said. Let's get to headquarters. Well, Dalton gathered up the whole team at the presidential court and started in telling them all what he was a-thinking, what this was all about, and who was in on it. He give out some background information that had been compiled as the boys had their run-in with those clowns before. The gals weren't no stranger to all this intrigue and high suspense, so they'd savvied what was all at stake. Every one of the gals spoke up and said that whatever had to be done, just to do it, they'd do their part. And then Dalton gave them a file to look at and all the information on the Illuminati pyramid and Blagnac, France, and just all other kind of information he had on it. Well, Dalton said that there are forces beyond this planet. They are powerful and hidden summers on Earth. Now, y'all folks know we talked about Crow Creek and all this stuff, and you folks say, well, this old boy done wrote something he don't know what he's talking about. He's dreaming this up. Folks, I might have seen, might not have seen. I'm not going to get into that. You think that's crazy? But people that we know have told us these things in black and white. So, like I said, they're all based on truth. Now, whether these people got sense or not, I can't tell you that. I can tell you we know the people. They have talked to us, and that's the information they've written to us and said they could prove it, so that's all I know. You can believe it or not believe you, but this is how the story comes about. Anyway, Dalton figures the code in the drawings tells where the source of power is hidden, and the Illuminati wants it. Remember the blue at Crow Creek? The message from Admiral Hannibal Patton Coulter stated some facts they needed to know. First off, the blue power source came from a planet Hendon centuries before the Admiral become involved with their folks there in the Intergalactic Federation. The power source was given to help the people on Earth for a better life, but evil forces from the galaxy and on Earth combined to steal the blue for themselves and enslave everybody on Earth. Woo, I got to fan myself on that. Like I said, it ain't me, it's what people told me. And me and the other boys. The good guys took and hid the power till a time when people on Earth was ready for it. That's where Julian comes in. The Indians, the Anastasia, elders, and the shaman had been dealing with and visiting the men and women from Hendon and other planets for some time. As evidence from their stories, from generation to generation, the cave writings and drawings and all this stuff, their honor could never be questioned. So the Hendon leaders met with the Indians and hid the blue power. The Indians have documented the people from Hendon and other planets for thousands of years in their stories and art. Well, according to old Dalton, said this is what they said. Dalton, find Julian and secure and destroy the blue power source before it's too late. We will contain or eliminate the threat from the rogue factions of the galaxy. The Illuminati must be stopped on Earth. Good luck and Godspeed. Hannibal Patton Coulter, Admiral, United Galactic Federation of the Galaxy of Hendon, Commander, Project Alliance. Folks, I'm fanning here. We know the feller. We've seen him. Whether they're got loose screws or not, or whether they know something we don't know, I can't tell you. But this, I told you, this is based on truth. And me and the boys, Walter and me especially, had a piece of ground and still do up there at Crow Creek, 160 acres, and all kinds of things going on up there. Well, Jesse asked Dalton if the blue power source wasn't removed up at the Crow Creek fracas when they had that dust up there. Dalton said one of them was, but there was two. I got our guys working on the code for the whereabouts of the location of the second power source. The Indians had used new methods and materials to make the drawings, preserve them in the jar. And when they put them in a cave by a waterfall in Idaho, and why they did it, I just don't know. Julian might be able to help us with that. But one thing is for sure. Julian is the onlyest one I know that can break the code. We got to get to him, and that's going to take Walter helping, stove up or not. Hired, can you get down to Texas and get him right now? On my way, be back later on today with him and Luann. Now, Dalton said to the boys and the gals that this was going to be one heck of a fight. The survival of life on Earth as we know it at stake here. Freedom just has went out, but them Illuminati are a tough bunch, and some of us just might not make it. That's the truth, y'all. Well, by the way, there is some interesting information about aliens here on Earth attached to the file I give you. It's a little light reading for you, but we got pictures for you too. Well, Hired got back with Walter and Luann in record time. In the meantime, Hired and Buster made arrangements for a sweat lodge on a secluded piece of ground that Dalton had access to. Well, Hired caught up him a rattler and put him in the sweat lodge for the ceremony while they was one they was going to get into. The four boys stripped down to their skivvies and got the steam to a rolling. Well, Hired took that old rattler and looked him in the eye and set him on the ground in front of the boys. Well, Buster, Jesse, and Walter was sitting up a bit off the floor on a bench, and Hired was on the ground with the rattler. You know, that boy ain't scared of no snake. He picks them up, puts them in the refrigerator. Alma May don't know what to think about that. The boy just had a way with critters. They knowed he was one with them and didn't mean them no harm. Well, after chanting in the way Julian showed him, his vision appeared to him in the steam. The rattler crawled up over all the boys and out the sweat lodge, never to be seen again. Well, Julian told the boys to go to the Yak River and camp for 3 days and he'd come. The boys got out of the sweat lodge and made ready to go to the Yak River to powwow with Julian. Walter was itching something fierce and just couldn't scratch under his cast on his leg and arm. He said he was going to cut the darn things off of him. Better not, said Buster Lewis. We'll wear you to a frazzle if you get testy and don't mind. Well, the boys told Dalton and Devane they could go with them, but had to stay back whilst they powwowed with Julian and not to say a word no matter what. The gals was to stay at headquarters with Horace till they was sent for or they come back, either one. It was a mite chilly when the boys got there to the Yak, so they built them a fire and settled in to wait for Julian. They purified themselves in the smoke and put on their dog ropes. Their sashes was plumb fanciful of things of beauty. Cheyenne dog soldiers, you know. Each of the boys put their pen in the ground and said to each other, "Hold the line." Things was quiet and peaceful as Dalton and Devane watched what all was going on. Now, all of a sudden, Julian come out to smoke and spoke to the boys. Walter hollered over to Dalton and Devane to come on over. It was an extreme honor to be at this meeting, and Julian told them so. No outsiders was ever allowed, but being the men they was, Dalton and Devane were invited because of the dire situation they was here in on Earth. Julian explained that the elders of Hendon gave the chief and the shaman of the Cheyenne the jar to be hid till such time as it was allowed to be seen. They traveled far to secure the jar where they was told. It was put in the jar in Idaho with drawings that could not have been made in that time era. It was done so everybody would know that there was other kindred spirits and beings in existence, but that evil abounded and had to be dealt with. The Admiral had been given the task of protecting them from the forces of evil from the galaxy and beyond, but was not allowed to interfere on Earth. The Illuminati was a handful, and the dog soldiers was there to help the righteous on Earth. Now, them Illuminati was meaner than a snake, and the boys in Dalton and Devane had experienced that firsthand, you know. They was a coming loaded for bear. This here fight was for all the marbles. Well, Julian told the boys that the blue power source was in an ice cave in Glacier National Park and to use their lasers to cut their way in. The site was in an area known as Goat Haunt. This remote region in the north could be reached on foot or by boat down upper Waterton Lake from Canada's Waterton Park. They'd know the exact spot by the power output showing on their True Power RMS detectors that addressed the challenge of measuring complex waveforms found in spread spectrum CDMA, W-CDMA, and a higher order QAM modulation system and provide accurately scaled DC voltage, which is RMS equivalent of the input waveform. Well, what that means, I don't know, folks. I have no idea. With that being said, and what a mouthful that was, the boys were ready for the fur to fly. Preparations had to be made and pronto. There had been an attempt to get the drawings and jar in Washington whilst the boys was gone to the Yak River, but security was so tight that wasn't going to happen. Horace hated up the team and had killed most of the hooligans and captured 3 of the yahoos. They was just hired guns of the Illuminati and didn't know nothing much. You can believe who the head honcho was that sent them buzzards. It was the Pindar, the head of the Rothschild family, Jacob Rothschild. Should have figured that, said Jesse, but what's more important is who all is with him and his bunch. Now, Dalton has a skinny on that, I bet you, said Walter. Well, Dalton spoke up and said he'd let Devane fill him in on that account. Devane said the Sinclair and Grail families was in whole hog, but all 13 families is involved in this war. All the family soldiers, as well as their mercenaries, are going to total near about 5,000 fighters. And they ain't no Boy Scouts neither now. You can have no pity on them whatsoever. Now gear up, boys, and let's take the fight to them, said Dalton. Whilst you gal, they told him, said, whilst you gals stay here with Horace and guard this jar of jars until we get the blue source of power. Well, because it ain't going to be easy, ladies, he said. You have to be prepared to destroy the drawings in the jar if necessary. Keep your finger on the button. The fate of the earth's on us. Will you stand tall? Well, as one, the gal said it'd be their privilege to be of service. Then they kissed her husband, sent them off to war with Godspeed, and told them all to come back. This wasn't going to be all-out war like in the past. It had to be low-key, like to avoid panic of the masses. This war would be fought in stages, but the final battle would be at the power source. Now, both sides would want to whittle down the other till they had the advantage. Presidential Corps took it to the French, German, and English Illuminati families right off the bat. And other parts of the world, the Illuminati consisted of the families of all a bunch of them. They had the Rothschilds, or Bauer spelled B-A-U or B-O-W, Bruce, Cavendish or Candish, de Medici, Hanover, Habsburg, Krupp, Plantagenet, Rockefeller, Romanoff, Sinclair or St. Clair, Warburg, de Blanco, Windsor, Saxe, Coburg, Ghost. Anyway, all these families of the Illuminati and all their subfamilies. The gals had their own in Washington, I tell you. They held it good, too. The Presidential Corps facilities could not be breached. Howard brung his an updated attack helicopter they used in Morocco, and that thing was a marvel, but the pilot was the key. Howard bested the best of them and was standing tall. The last in a standing tall, too. Howard had been hitting in several, Star, that's the name of the helicopter he had, you know. Several times, but managed to get her landing and not get killed or hurt. But Howard and his friends put the hurt on them Illuminati strongholds for sure. Them Illuminati fanatics had some gumption and resources as well, and took out many of the elite special op teams from our allies around the world that was in that fray. They had some weapons they didn't have and thumped them real good. Over 90% of them boys never made it back. Now the boys had fought high and low and was finally getting to the end. Each side won some and lost some, but it come down to about 300 men on each side, give or take a few up at the ice cave. Of course, the Illuminati followed them every step of the way, fighting and something fierce, you know. Well, Dalton had heard that the Admiral Coulter and the Alliance fighters had whooped the reptilians and their thugs and had run them off or killed them. So no help for the Illuminati there, but the boys couldn't get none either from the Admiral. Well, Howard managed to get all 6 of them into the spot they detected at Goat Haunt. Howard set his chopper down and all of them got out to secure the blue power. They was on to the blue power source signal, and Howard started into cutting away with the lasers, but it wasn't going to be that easy now. The Illuminati had a passel of fellers waiting in the wings, so to speak, to do the boys in. Of course, the Illuminati wanted Dalton and Devane real bad. They knowed about the Presidential Corps for sure, and had all manner of devilment in their eyes to get what they could from Dalton, and especially. The boys didn't have much of a fight getting into the blue power source, but getting out was going to be something else. The new laser rifles blasted through the ice with no problem, but what was awaiting on them wasn't going to be good. There was boulders aplenty to hide behind, but no way out, and the bad guys was coming in on them, trying to surround them and hem them all in. That was kind of hard to do on the ice behind them, but their air superiority was taking a toll. It wasn't that they flew better than Dalton's pilots, but they had some kind of sound weapon and a gizmo that shut down all power at the aircraft. It was something like was on the Gulfstream 442, but different. Finally, Iron Space Station launched a satellite that could effectively emit a counteractive beam to their sound weapon. It was from the elders on Hendon that sent it to the space station by way of Admiral Coulter. Even though the elders' directive was not to interfere here on Earth, the Illuminati had been given the sound weapon by an evil rogue faction in the galaxy, and they would not stand by and let Earth be conquered by outside evil forces. It was a game changer for sure. Basically, it was a man-to-man fighting now. The boys outnumbered around about 12 to 1, and all of them had a wound or skun up a bit. Nothing real serious like, but it was getting that way. The boys huddled up and put their pen in the ground and said to hold the line. When it seemed all was lost, Cheyenne Dog soldiers come to the rescue. There was no quarter. When all of the enemy was killed, the Indians vanished. Only Julian knowed the explanation for that. In the middle of it all, Julian and Admiral Coulter showed up in his spaceship and took possession of the Blue. It was safely secured back on Hendon with its power under the guardianship of the elders. Now, cleanup was awful, and special provisions were made to keep everything as quiet as possible. All manner of excuses was made to keep from telling what all really went on. It seems kind of simple in the telling of what all went on, but it weren't. Killing ain't never easy. In the days that followed, many more higher-ups in the Illuminati disappeared. Heads of organizations and government agencies left with no word of why. The Illuminati may not be entirely destroyed, but they were sure enough bit real bad, and it would take several lifetimes for them to come back, if ever. Well, after the boys got settled in after the showdown, Admiral Coulter and Julian visited Dalton and the boys and told them that the Blue had been returned to Hendon. They all met up to see how Walter was making out. He thunked some of them Illuminati soldiers with his cast on his arm and kicked a few with a cast on his leg. Said it didn't hurt none at all. Of course, he had to put some Kevlar and ceramic covering over both of them, and it would take a bomb to dent the darn things. When the boys drove up, Walter was whittling on them casts of his'n and trying to scratch the itching that was driving him crazy. About that time, the boys see Lou Ann come a-charging out the house with a broom just flailing old Walter. She was a-fussing at him, beat the band to leave them casts alone. Well, the boys figured out right quick that they need to be somewheres else and hollered to Walter they'd see him later. Boy, that woman was fit to be tied, said Buster, and they all went to laughing and glad it wasn't them. Well, all the boys bended, and the jar and drawing sit in Buster's office at the house with the knowledge that right has might when God is on your side. Y'all have a blessed day, and I hope you enjoyed it. Write old Buster and the boys at yahoo.com. Y'all have a good evening and a blessed one.